Wow, I got to tell you, I was inside court today. You can cut the tension with a knife if you think that tempers are flaring on our Lion's Den panel. Just in court, you just saw it, you just heard it. Tanya Acker, this is a mega trial, and we know that things get very tense. It's happened in every single case that we've covered, whether it be the O.J. Simpson case or the Michael Jackson child molestation case or the Casey Anthony case or the Jodi Arias trial. It gets real personal and it gets real tense, especially at this stage when we're just approaching closing arguments. Why?
No, that's right. I mean, look, everything's on the line. I think that the prosecution's nervous because of the way the case is going. I think that the defense, as most defense attorneys in almost every case I've either covered or seen or participated in, they get very aggressive, as they should be. I've actually received a lot of tweets about this because a lot of folks are saying that the judge is being really harsh on the defense. Look, I think that can sometimes play both sides, but this is very typical. Everybody's watching this case, and the tensions are high both inside and outside the courtroom. I wouldn't expect anything any different.
Yeah, and by the way, I spoke to a group of pastors who arrived here, and they were outside court. I'm going to play that for you in a second because they're calling for the exact opposite. They are calling for love. They are calling for inclusion. They are calling for peace and nonviolence, and they are calling for, in the name of the victim, Trayvon Martin, whatever the decision by this jury for calm and for peace. That's what they call for. We're going to play my interview in a second with one of those pastors. Let's go out to the phone lines. Bonnie Gay, Washington. Bonnie Gay, your question or thought?
I was just saying, George Zimmerman, I believe the nicks on his head, instead of them being called those abrasions, I think they happened during the tussle on the ground with Trayvon Martin when they were tussling. I think his head hit the side of the pavement, not his head was being bashed in. Also, I believe that Zimmerman confronted Trayvon Martin with that gun. He showed that child that gun some way, somehow, and when Trayvon saw that gun, he hit Zimmerman to get away. Zimmerman grabbed that child and held on because, like he stated, these a-holes always get away. He had it in his mind that this one wasn't going to get away. So he held on to that child, and that child fought him.
You raised some very good points, and I want to throw them at Anahita Sadagatfar because you're a criminal defense attorney who's speaking up for George Zimmerman. Is there an inherent bias in this case where it's assumed that, well, George Zimmerman was the one who was scared and worried about a suspicious person? Why shouldn't we take the same exact approach that Trayvon Martin was scared and worried about a suspicious person and maybe even afraid that George Zimmerman was going to mug him?
Right, and that is definitely a pivotal issue that the jurors are going to consider. And I think your caller did raise a very important issue, Jane, that I don't think we've touched upon. And that is that the prosecution has essentially failed to provide those jurors with a cohesive story as to what happened that night. How did George Zimmerman get those injuries? They failed to address that. They failed to provide the jurors with a story to explain that away to them. Their main theory has been what happened is not what George Zimmerman says happened. Well, then what did happen? I think the prosecution hasn't answered that for the jurors. And that leaves a big question mark.
Let me throw that to John Murray.
Jane.
Do you get a sense that the prosecution has failed in that matter to paint a real good alternative theory of the case?
I do agree with that, as much as I would hate to. The prosecution has not been as strong as I would like them to be. I also have to give credit to the Zimmerman's defense team. They've been really good in creating the reasonable doubt in this case. The prosecution has not been able to eradicate it at all. But what I do think, Jane, is you made an excellent point leading up to this. Trayvon Martin was defending himself. This stranger who he did not know, who was in possession of a gun, came after him. He was trying to defend himself. He was in a fight for his life. So no matter what happened to George Zimmerman, if he would have just followed instructions, followed the people on the phone who told him to leave the boy alone, he would never have been in this predicament. This case would never be going on. We wouldn't be discussing this right now.
Well, this is part of the problem of this case. Everybody says, who's the aggressor? Well, how do you define that? Where does the aggression start? Does it start when George Zimmerman calls the non-emergency number? Does it start when he gets out of his car? Does he start when they actually come face to face, when words are exchanged, when they become physically entangled? When does the aggression start? it's not easy to define the terms if you're trying to fit those terms into the law.